Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus podcast episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest is an historical fiction novelist, having written the novel The Girl of Many Crowns, set in 9th century Europe. Her name is D.H. Morris, and my interview with D.H. will follow the note-taking sounds. D.H. Morris, welcome to the Apollo Papyrus podcast.
Thank you, Aaron. I'm so glad to be here.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Well, I was born in San Diego, California. I lived as a Californian until my parents moved to Japan. And I lived there for a while. And I ended up marrying someone who joined the military. So I have lived on 4 different continents and have traveled through many different countries. But right now, I am happily settled. My husband and I are happily settled in the middle of the United States, and this is where we're retiring. And it's in Kansas City, Missouri, home of the best barbecue and one of the best football teams, too. I actually, if you want to know what I did through all those years of traveling as a military wife, I have taught college, I've run an education center, I've written plays, I've directed plays. My undergraduate was in music and theater. So I was an academic program manager for overseas sites when we lived in Europe, and that included Egypt. So I also went to Egypt and ran the education center there for 6 months. So I've had a lot of chance to travel and to explore the world. And I can honestly tell you there's no better place than the United States. And I'm happy to be here.
Your historical fiction novel is titled The Girl of Many Crowns. Without spoiling too much about it, what is it about?
Well, The Girl of Many Crowns is basically the true story dramatized. All the events in there, are true. I just had to imagine what they would look like. So pretty much because these are real characters, you could look it up and find out what happens to these characters if you do some historical research. But it is about the first princess of France. Her name is Judith. She's the great-granddaughter of Charlemagne, and her father marries her off at the age of 12 to the aged and widowed King of Wessex for political reasons. So Judith is one of the main characters. The other main character is named Baldwin Ironarm. He's a knight, and actually the book starts with his story. He comes to the palace of King Charles, Judith's father, and he is made the companion and mentor of Judith's younger brother. So they meet, a friendship develops, but then Judith goes off and is married. We follow her journey, but simultaneously we follow Baldwin's journey as he accompanies Judith's younger brother, Louis. In history, he's named, when he becomes king, he's named or referred to as Louis the Stammerer because he had a stammer. Baldwin is tasked with defending the king, his realm, and his family, and in particular Louis. And he pledges to do that. So we follow what is going on in France, or Francia at the time, and we follow what is going on in England, or Wessex, through Judith's eyes. And we see that Charles, King Charles, and also Judith's husband, Athelwulf, are both under siege from various dangers that are seeking to take their kingdoms. this is a time of Vikings. This is a time where borders were only as strong as your army was at the time. So King Charles is beset on every side by Vikings, by his brother, who is Louis the German, who is trying to take his kingdom from him, by rebel lords, and by one of his provinces, Brittany, which is having uprisings and conflicts themselves. Judith is widowed within a year and a half. She remarries and then is widowed again a year and a half after that. At that point, Judith says, sorry, she decides she's coming back to Francia on her own and decides she will not marry again. When she announces that to her father goes into a rage and he imprisons her in the palace. And she is kept there until she's visited by her brother, Louis, several years older now, and Baldwin Ironarm, his companion. Baldwin and Judith fall in love, and an escape is arranged. And then they are chased all over the empire and have to flee to Rome to plead their case before the Pope. It's a very dangerous thing that they've done. They're risking their life. It's something that you don't do. You don't tell the king no. But in the meantime, you will see all the other things that are happening within the kingdom, the other pressures that are on Charles, how he almost loses his kingdom. And when he goes to war with his brother, Louis the German. So it's heavily into history, but it's a part of history that really hasn't been touched much by historical fiction authors. They do often place things in the time of the Vikings, and sometimes they will refer to some of the Viking leaders as characters in their book, but every character, with the exception of a few servants in this book, are the actual people. And there's a afterword that I include at the end of the book that gives a synopsis of each of the characters and what happened to them following the end of the book, so that you know what happens. Now, Judith and Baldwin, obviously, it ends happy because these are some ancestors of mine. And so I'm writing about great 30 great grandparents, 30th, something like that. And when I came upon their story, I was fascinated by it. And I originally started writing it so that I could share it with my family. And I did so much research just to make sure that I had all my facts and dates correct. And it was pretty long. And someone says, well, why don't you publish it as a book? And I thought, well, it's reading really dry. So then I had a very different challenge, and that was to take basically a history book, pare it down, take out all the extra facts that didn't need to be included, and make it into the form of an interesting and fast-paced novel that people would like to read. So that is how the book, The Girl of Many Crowns, came to pass. And the title refers to the fact that she starts by being born into royalty. She wears a tiara as a princess, but then she's married twice and becomes Queen of Wessex twice. And then after that, she gives all of that up, and you will see why and how. The facts are historical. So as I said, you can look them up and see what happens to them ultimately, but the fun is in the story along the way. And I thoroughly enjoyed researching it and telling their story.
The Girl of Many Crowns is set in ninth century Western Europe. Could you describe what your research was like?
Okay, there are a lot of records from that time, but they were all written in Latin. Some of them have been translated into English. I'm so grateful for that. And um, some of them have been translated into German. My husband and I, in our military travels, we lived in Germany for 12, 14 years. And I learned enough German, and between the two of us, we were able to manage those records. The Latin, not so much. And there are some great historians, professors from Oxford, etc., who have specialized in Charles, King Charles, Charles the Bald, they call him. The historians called him later, just to distinguish, because there were so many Charleses, so many Louis, that they had to give them a moniker just to distinguish them. So this is the first king of France, basically, Charles the Bald. And Janet L. Nelson is one of the foremost historians. She's a British professor emeritus. She has devoted basically her life's work to that period of time. And she was an incredible resource for everything from the laws that were passed that year. What I have in the book is what was passed that year. The places they met, that's where they met. The dates things happened, those were, much of that came from her and other people who had gone and done fantastic research on Charles the Bald, King Athelwulf, who was the father of Alfred the Great. And so there is a lot out there. Just, I don't know why no one has bothered to put this together as far as Judith's story and Baldwin Ironarm's story. They hadn't before, so that was my challenge. I basically took something called the Annals of St. Bertin. It was a chronicle of what happened year by year, written by the monks of that time. And they would say, this is what happened in this year, this year, this year. And I used that as the framework for my book. So it basically covers 7 years from 856 through 863. And it talks about it brings to life all of the events that occurred in that year. Now, if there were gaps, then I would go to other research, such as here we have Judith in Wessex, and maybe I have too long a gap without any information as to exactly what she was doing during that time. Then I went to what happened during that time. Oh, there was like Christmas. What was a Christmas celebration like in Wessex in the 800s? I was amazed at how much I was able to find. Actual poems, actual riddles, actual songs that were sung during different holidays in the 800s in France and in England. So wherever I found something, some little gem, I included it because I was fascinated by it. And I fell in love with the story decades ago and finally decided to write it during COVID because I had nothing else to do. It was like we were all stuck at home, and it was the time to finally put together all the research I had been accumulating. I finished and gathered more research and then just started writing.
Okay. Before I ask the next question, I'm going to let you know. Don't take quite as long, if all possible, to answer questions because I still have several questions and about 15 minutes left.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Uh, the ninth century in medieval Western Europe is seen as a transitional period between early and late medieval times. How do you view the evolution of Francia during that time?
Well, this is the Carolingian Renaissance, and it was a short period of time, and they were focused on culture, they were focused on education, but it lasted only as long as the Carolingian rulers were there. And that started with Charlemagne and ended not too long after the time we're talking about. So it was just a brief little bright spark in the midst of an otherwise more dark age. Some people call it the dark age. I don't really feel like it deserves that completely, but this was a brief spark where everybody was really focused on trying to increase education for everyone, culture, etc. If the Vikings had let them.
Do you see any parallels between the political and social climate of ninth century Francia and modern political struggles in today's world? And if so, what are a couple of them?
Well, the most glaring one to me, I think of our current government and how it's surrounded by various other countries that don't mean us well. We've got problems come from the borders. We've got problems from drugs. We've got problems from China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And these are all threats. They would do us ill if they could. And then we have turmoil from within as well. That's what Charles was facing. Had he had the fear of rebel lords, of rebellious provinces, of his brother's neighboring kingdom who wanted his kingdom, and of Vikings who were constantly causing terror. They were basically the terrorists of our age. And at one point, he says, what happens if all these things hit at once? We're dealing with these one at a time as they come at us, but what happens if they all come at once? Then we need a miracle. They got their miracle. I wonder sometimes if everything came at us at once, if we would also need a miracle to survive it.
The next question I have is about how you developed the book's narrative and characters. In your book, did you emphasize the personal stories of the characters, the larger historical events, or did you try to strike a balance between both? And also, did you rely primarily on a single protagonist to tell the story?
Okay, I'll start with the last question first. The story is actually told from 3 points of view, just so we can get all the events that are occurring, because it's very complex. We see things from Baldwin Ironarm's point of view from the very beginning, and then we see things from Judith's point of view. Those 2 points of view give us a rich scope of what is going on through Wessex and also through much of Francia. But in order to get a view into what is happening in the seat of government, King Charles's main advisor, his name was Hincmar, a very fascinating person, an Archbishop of Reims. And he was probably one of the most prolific writers of the 9th century and very influential. But he is the third perspective, so that we know what the councils of the king are planning and why. We know what they're facing. So we have all 3 perspectives. And then when when Baldwin Ironarm and Judith get together, their perspectives join, and we have just the two. Let's see, what else did you ask me? I'm sorry.
Uh, Whether you emphasize the personal stories of the characters or the larger historical events of the period.
I really tried to strike a balance between the two because they were so affected by what was going on in the political world around them that I could not ignore that. You had to see what was happening in the world and then see their reaction and how it affected them and why it was such a momentous decision for them to defy the empire and to go out on their own. It was, they were risking their lives. And you also see how that affected Judah's father and the other kingdoms around. It's all interrelated. And so I tried to strike a really good balance. And also I tried to strike a balance between very serious and deep deep passages with some fun, lighter passages so that the reader would not become burdened by what was happening. If it was a dark scene, then we want to have some light scenes for relief as well. So I found some fun in there as well as passion, as well as violence, as well not as well as plotting. And I think it's a good balance. I think it represents what happened so that people get a good perspective of that day and of the people involved.
Is your book, The Girl of Many Crowns, independently, traditionally, or hybrid published?
It's a hybrid published, but yeah, it was mainly, I don't know, I guess you would say, yeah, hybrid.
Are there any spin-offs from or sequels of The Girl of Many Crowns in the works?
I am currently writing actually a prequel to The Girl of Many Crowns. Judith was named for her grandmother, Judith, the empress of the Holy Roman Empire, married to Charles's father, Louis the Pious. He was the son of Charlemagne. And her story is quite intriguing. I've written 2 chapters. I stopped so I could do more research, and then I'll take it up again. But it's her story starts almost like a Cinderella story, where she is chosen from a bride show of beautiful, talented, intelligent maidens, noble maidens brought before the emperor, who will choose his bride. And then now Louis the Pious is a widower. He has grown sons. They already have pretty much put their mark on what part of his empire they want when he dies. So when Empress Judith, gives birth to a son, everything changes. It starts a series of civil wars. And she has to do everything within her power to save the life and the inheritance of her son, who becomes Charles the Bald. And it's a very fascinating story. I think most of the women of this time are not written about unless they did something unusual. Then the monks would make note of them in their annals. So we have the 2 Judiths who have been written about, but there are so many women who have been kind of forgotten in the 9th century because the monks didn't find that they did anything unusual. So these 2 Judiths, I think, stand out for that reason because they were written about in the annals. And so I have enough material that I can actually write their story.
One final question. What is something that is unique and or quirky about you?
About me?
Yeah, about you.
Oh, that's a good question. Um, I don't know that I have anything extremely unique or quirky. I I don't know. That's a good question. I've never thought of it.
Well, it was based on something that was on a recommended list of questions uh, 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 on your Podmatch page.
Was it?
It
Okay.
was.
Well, I love dogs, and that's not unusual.
Okay. Okay.
I love dogs and peanut butter, and I love foreign foods of all kinds, and none of that is unusual. I don't think. I wonder how that got on that podcast match. That's very interesting.
I'm going to have to leave that blooper in the final interview.
Yes, yes, because
uh,
I'm so sorry.
uh, Deborah, it's been amazing to interview you. You were an amazing and insightful guest, and I thank you for appearing on the Apollo Papyrus podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Aaron. It's been fun.
As historical fiction is one of my favorite genres and a genre I plan on writing multiple books in, it was amazing to interview DH about her novel. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to find your writing and reading purpose. Bye for now. Copyright 2025, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.